Welcome back. I'm talking to David Caton about UK UFO cases, and I mentioned Rendlesham Forest before the break, David. It's probably the most famous case in the UK, and many books have been written about it, Sky Crash being one of them, You Can't Tell the People another, and these books are pretty conclusive in the fact that this was a genuinely unexplained event. This UFO left impressions in the ground, which were, impressions were taken, and, Jim Penniston actually touched this craft. It was witnessed by over 50 airmen. Now, when I was at the Exopolitics conference a few weeks ago, this article appears in the Daily Telegraph, and it's basically about the US commander who was in charge of the base at the time, who's not spoken for 31 years about the Rendlesham case. He's suddenly trying to debunk the case, and I'll just quote here. He said Charles Holt was the deputy commander, and he has made extensive statements about this being a genuine structured craft.
Yeah, I should explain there's two bases. There's Bentwaters and Woodbridge, just a mile or two apart. Two colonels, there's Colonel Williams and Conrad. I'm not sure which base they were in charge of, and Holt was the deputy base commander, and Williams instructed Charles Holt to write the memo, the famous memo in 1981 in February, to our MOD, explaining what had happened. And Colonel Conrad at the time didn't have a lot to say publicly, but Charles Holt has responded to that journalist at the Telegraph.
I'll just read out his quote. So this was in the Telegraph.
Yeah.
We saw nothing that resembled Lieutenant Holt's descriptions either in the sky or on the ground. Colonel Conrad is scathing about his former deputy. He should be ashamed and embarrassed by his allegations that his country and England both conspired to deceive their citizens over this issue. He knows better. So this guy's not really gone on record, and suddenly he's brought out 31 years later, and he's saying this. And, I mean, what do you think's going on here, David? Why? I mean, I know Gary Heseltine, who's probably done more research on anyone on this case, he was incensed by this article.
Well, he would be, because Gary has done a film script about Rendlesham with agreement and alongside Colonel Holt, who has put his input in as Gary went along to make sure the facts were correct. So what's triggering the government now to persuade Colonel Conrad over in the States to say all these contradictory statements, really accusing his fellow Colonel Williams, never mind Charles Holt, effectively lying? I mean, I can't... But what the motive is, I don't know. I mean, have they sort of threatened his pension or something? But why, after all this time, has he done that?
Mm-hmm. And Dr. David Clarke, who you mentioned earlier, who is responsible for writing the executive summary of the UFO files, he's quoted in this article. Dr. Clarke, who is a skeptic on UFO issues, believes Lieutenant Colonel Holt saw some form of optical illusion. Okay, so this is Dr. Clarke now pouring cold water on the case as well. And if we just stick on Clarke for a little while, because he also tried to debunk the Milton Torres case from 1957, when he brought up Project Palladium.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that, David?
Yeah. Well, that shook me. I'd never heard of this secret Project Palladium, which was an American thing they were playing around with, was to produce false radar signals in the air to fool enemy pilots and enemy radar, so that they would scramble and waste their resources sending aircraft off to intercept an enemy, which was literally a ghost radar signal in the sky. Now, how did David Clarke get to know about Project Palladium? First off, I couldn't imagine he would have picked it up just at random, so somebody has briefed Clarke to come out with that. So I went into the internet and Googled it and ended up with Wikipedia and found that palladium was not actually used for the first time for real till 3 years later, till 1960, and it was operated and trialled in Germany into the eastern sector of Germany, still when Germany was divided. So in other words, the Americans tested it over there, not over Suffolk or the North Sea in 1957. So why was this introduced? And in my view, it was introduced to diminish and water down the importance of 2 American pilots based on British soil, authorised to fire between them 48 Mighty Mouse missiles in our airspace from RAF Fighter Command HQ at Bentley Priory. So I mean,
and Torres was debriefed, and he was told,
yeah.
he was reminded of his official secrets,
Yes.
and he was, you know, told not to speak about the event, basically. And if he hadn't spoken about the event in the late 1980s,
yeah.
it probably wouldn't have been, no one would probably know about the case.
No, he was warned by an American who came from London to the base in Kent in Manston, and him and his wingman were both interviewed separately, and this guy was from the NSA, the National Security Agency, and was warned this was top secret and classified, you mustn't talk about it, not even to his wing commander, his base commander in Manston.
Okay, David, I'd like to throw it open for anyone to ask questions or make any comments at all. Do we have anyone in the audience who wants to be the first to speak? Yes, sir.
About the Milton Torres case, I'm interested in... sorry, I didn't wait for the microphone. The deciding to shoot down a UFO, I wonder what you guys thought about, the thinking behind that. Do you think that was a standing order just to get hold of craft at any cost? What do you think about that?
I just think they're a bunch of arrogant fools. That's my answer. But
yeah.
It just sounds totally bizarre, just as something, shoot it down.
I mean, you've got to bear in mind there'll be rules of conflict firmly laid down. We're in the height of the Cold War in 1957, and the Americans were employed to do the scramble because they had the fastest jet in the UK at the time. Could go faster than the Hunters, or the Venom certainly was slow by comparison. So they scrambled these 2 guys who were looking after what they call Met sector, the metropolitan sector, which covered the London area and the southeast. So there was 2 reasons why they were scrambled, not the Royal Air Force. And Torres was horrified, and he was shut rigid when he got this coded order to fire his 24 Mighty Mouse missiles. He pointed out that it was over our airspace, and by comparison, just going back to Rendlesham for a minute, Colonel Holt and all his men who went into the forest, they stepped off the base, and when they stepped off the base, they had to leave a guy with a truck and take all the sidearms off and leave their weapons in the truck. They couldn't even take a firearm into our territory, because once they've crossed over the fence into the forest, they're in the UK. So here we have, as a contrast, the Royal Air Force Fighter Command at Bentley Priory, which I reckon where the executive order came from, and it would have to come from a high rank, it wouldn't be just a controller at Bordsey Manor, who was the GCI for Torres and his friend, or even down the bunker in Essex, where they'd been, to fire these weapons on our airspace, and also loose off a very expensive ordnance. You think of the cost of doing that. So Torres was like a 26-year-old lieutenant at the time. He says in his testimony, I almost shit my pants. And he shut the lights down in the cockpit, and he's trying to check this order on a notepad on his flying suit knee that he got, and he challenged it to check he got it right, and they confirmed he must fire his rockets.
Any other questions or even comments? All right, we'll plough on with these files, because there's another thing. There's one section of it entitled Bogus UFO Stories by National Press. You had a comment you wanted to make about that, Dave.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. This is, again, the MOD having a pop at the media. In this case, the media were apparently doing the right thing, I don't know. There's a printed media coverage of UFOs between 1996 and 2002. In April 1998, 2 national newspapers, which are not specified, claimed that radars at the early warning radar station RAF Farlingdales in North Yorkshire had tracked a UFO as big as a battleship, moving at speeds between 17,000 and 24,000 miles per hour over the North Sea. The story claimed that Dutch F-16 fighters had been scrambled, and tapes of the incident would be presented at a conference hosted by RAF Cranwell, Lincolnshire. Labour's Under-Secretary of State for the MOD at the time was John Speller, MP, saw the articles and asked for a briefing from the MOD. He was told the source of the story was a freelance journalist who was known to be rather inventive of the facts. Now, they had a separate note from Fylingdales itself, RAF Fylingdales, who confirmed that no UFOs had ever been tracked by the station during its 35-year history. And that mentions another file number reference there. Now,
you reckon that can't possibly be true, David?
Yes, I mean, the UK NORAD, if people know about NORAD in the States, we've got 3 radar early warning stations, one up at Staxton Wold in near Scarborough, there's Fylingdales, and there's Neatishead in Norfolk. And we've just heard that Neatishead in 1956 had on tape, on radar, the UFO that the Venoms were scrambled to search in 1956. So I do not accept that Fylingdales, unlike Neatishead or Staxton Wold, can't see anything that's coming into our airspace, because they see everything.
So it's possible that that entire story is actually true and that the statement's been put out, you know, to debunk it?
Yes, yeah.
OK, then, Dave. Well, I'm going to change the subject now. If viewers of this show will be aware of what is termed false flag terrorism, we've covered that a lot, and it's my belief that both the 9/11 and 7/7 events were contrived events. They were carried out by shady groups within the military. Now, but before these 2 events, I believe that there was predictive programming put out in the media. So several months before 9/11 occurred, there was a drama which envisioned terrorists flying planes into the World Trade Center. And about a year before the 7/7 attacks, we had a panorama documentary which envisioned almost exactly what happened in the 7/7 London bombings. And, you know, psychologists will tell you that this is predictive programming, that they're putting these ideas out there so that when they happen, they're more likely to be accepted by the public. Now that I've stated that, I'm going to now introduce another article by one of our mainstream newspapers that was in the paper the other day, the 18th of August. Aliens may destroy humanity to protect other civilizations, say scientists. OK, so you know what I'm going to say next.
Who are these scientists?
Well, who are the scientists, yeah. But you know, and there's been more than one of these type of articles sort of trying to fearmonger about aliens that are going to come and invade us. I think, is it Michio Kaku, the famous physicist, he has made comments that aliens may be hostile. I mean, and then we've got, but on this, you know, a couple of days before that, we've got they're debunking Rendlesham. So, I mean, what do you think's going on, David? I mean, do you think this could be predictive programming, these sort of stories, that there's something going to happen?
That's on the cards, I think, yeah.
You think it's on the cards? Yeah. I mean, Ian Crane has spoken about this, the fake alien invasion at the Olympics. And, you know, we're all called crackpots for actually suggesting this. Does anyone have a comment on this type of article?
Yeah, don't forget, this was in National Geographic, which is a science-type paper in America, and also the History Society. This announcement earlier this year that the Pentagon is preparing for and anticipating a space war. And we've also can't miss, a terrific lot of films coming out of alien attack, portraying them as menacing. So this is quite definitely some new strategy coming from America, I would say, maybe to ratify Star Wars programs or whatever.
I would just like to say what I can't square up with, Nick, is if aliens don't exist because they're now debunking Rendlesham, that wasn't an alien event. If they were trying to do what Richard and people are suggesting, they've got to prove to the public psyche that aliens exist in the first place. Otherwise, what's the point of saying these unknown, non-existent beings are a danger to us? You know, it doesn't stack up to me.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Madam Hedda.
Well, in my opinion, it's kind of preparing the masses for globalization, because an alien threat would then mean that the world has to pull together.
Okay.
And use this in a bad way. It would bring the one world order down one step closer.
Okay. It's rather ironic that if it does happen and it is fake, it's going to be the ufologists telling everyone that it's not a real UFO. And any other comments?
Well,
Yes, Nick,
just
go on.
in general, thought that the Empire wants people to live in fear. They're always creating fear images. Now, if you remember the new millennium, there was this terrific hype about the bug. Everyone was scared shitless about this bug, which turned out not really to exist.
Tell me about it. Yeah.
Now we've got 2012, everyone's getting apocalyptic stories and rumours and hopes and mythologies, and perhaps by putting this in, they're just trying to get their mentality of fear around this event so that people have something to be frightened about.
Sure. OK, well, we're going to go for a short break, and joining us after the break is Richard Lenny, who has researched allegations that NASA, which is a military organisation, has a secret space programme that most of its own employees are completely unaware of.